Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first edition of ACMO's Condo podcast. Our guest is Patrick Greco, a lawyer and partner at Shibley Righton, frequent speaker at ACMO and CCI shows, writer of articles, and an added bonus, a podcast enthusiast. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, Eric. This will be number 201 of the podcasts I follow, and I listen to them all at least 2x speed. I want you to know, but I'll listen to you at 1.5 just because I like hearing your voice.
That's amazing. And so when Patrick first told me that he listens to like 200 or 300 podcasts, I was like, oh, that's really good. He knows a lot about podcasts. And I'm like, wait a sec. I've listened to two podcasts and I've never hosted anything in my life. So I'm just like, okay, while we go about today's podcast, Patrick is just going to be sitting there thinking like, it's a terrible job this guy's doing, but I'll make it work. So
You
it's
are the
great.
Joe
He knows
Rogan.
what he's doing.
You are the
Yeah.
Joe Rogan of condo podcasts, Eric. Just think of it
We
that
will
way, for
we will
better and
find
for
out
worse.
we will find out in the next half hour if I know what I'm doing. All right. So the first thing we got to talk about before we even get into condos is we don't have a name yet because this is a very new podcast. We have not thought of that. As you can tell from my background, I'm fully not set up for this, but we're going to do it anyways, and we'll grow as the show grows. So we had a few names in mind. Backrooms, backrooms and balconies.
Nice one.
Okay, that wasn't the reaction I was hoping for. We're gonna
But
keep
we're
going.
building up. We're building up. You always
Condo chaos.
closer to the mark.
Okay, life in layers.
Oh, I like that.
I
Yeah,
like
because
that one
not
too.
only is it condos, but it's lasagna, it's cakes, it's
Yeah,
really
it's an onion.
multi-purpose.
A condo
Yeah.
is an onion. And thank you, ChatGPT, for that. Do you have any yourself? You know, suggestions?
Not so special assessments,
I like that.
um, armchair board meeting.
Okay.
I don't know. We
I'm
should.
not seeing the 200 podcasts coming out here.
No, no, that's because I just passively absorb them. I like
Yeah.
don't have to do anything, Eric. Uh,
How
but I'm
about
sure our
penthouse?
listeners.
What about
Sorry, go ahead.
penthouse? No, we can't do penthouse. Penthouse is a no. Um,
That's fair. Yeah.
I feel like
Although,
somebody has that name already. Okay.
yeah, it's got some connotations.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. We're going to
Yeah.
come back to that. So right now you're listening to the nameless ACMO podcast about condos. Um, so this so the first time we're doing this, as I mentioned, and we're going to choose a pretty broad topic today, and that topic is going to be how condos act as a microcosm for society. And what that means is really how a condo represents our ability to achieve great things when we work together, when we put our differences aside, cooperate, and no, I can see you're like about to laugh. No, this condo is not that. This is the exact opposite. What we're going to talk about today is how condos represent our increasing struggle with conflict and civility. Anyone who's managed a condo or been on a condo board, or some people who even lived in a condo, has experienced this firsthand. It can get pretty messy in condominiums. And I guess we'll start with that. Why do you think we're having such trouble getting along in the condo world?
It was always, I'm not going to say a powder keg. It was always interesting because you put any number of people together in a room or a building, and there's going to be tensions. There's going to be a few interesting characters, and that was always the case. But, to the theme of a microcosm of society, post-pandemic or during the pandemic and now post-pandemic, our buildings and our communities are going the same direction. It looks like the same stuff we are seeing on the street, in the media, and who knows who's creating what. But anxiety, frustration, aggression, divisiveness, all that stuff has made its way into condos. Or if it was already there, kind of under the surface, it is now really coming into full bloom. It is spring after all, but it is coming into full bloom, and everyone is paying the price, all of us in the industry.
No, absolutely, and I think you're right. It's in the general view of society, you've got a certain percentage, let's say, of people who are just not well adapted to living with other people. Let's say 60, 70%. No, maybe 10%. I don't know what the number is.
Feels that way.
And of those people, you've got that maybe less than 1% or maybe more who are just absolutely incapable of being around other people and are highly, highly toxic. And I think you're right. As society kind of goes up and down with whatever it is in the media, whatever's going on. We've got an American president right now, for those of you who are watching much, much later, who's starting a trade war. So there's a lot of anxiety out there, and I think that filters down and sort of amps up those percentages. So instead of 60% of people being maladapted, it's like 95 right now. And
Yeah.
being
And
yeah, it's maybe not
throw
that
into
many.
that a housing mix where this is where people live. They live in condos. They always lived to some extent in apartment buildings and what have you, but now this is, especially in urban centers, a giant part of our housing mix. So those problems are naturally shifting over there. And, we don't have, none of us, especially frontline managers, boards, are not trained. They're not tasked to do that. It's like really no one's job other than first response, police, etc. And we can talk about those a little later on, I'm sure.
Well, I know like back when I was a kid, which was probably around the time you were a kid, more or less,
Yeah.
it was mostly rentals. It was apartment buildings. And so you had an owner who owned a building, and the people in the building, for better or worse, had to live under the rules of that owner and the law, of course. And then you started building condos, and we went crazy with the condo boom. It was more profitable. The units got smaller, the condos got bigger. And you get this situation where now you're telling people you've got to manage your own group home. You got to manage this thing by yourself. And and we're done. Like there, you have your law, you have your condo act, but no one's sort of watching and taking charge. It's you self-managing. You're in charge of your own money, your own physical structure, your own rules, your own bylaws. And as we've seen with some other layers of government, which I won't mention, that's problematic. People should not be trusted to run anything. Um,
No, I often say, where in small business would you trust, not only the value of your unit, potentially, north of $1 million, but also a budget of multiple millions to a bunch of volunteers? Like it's strange when you really, we're so in it every day, right? But when you step back, you're like, is this really a thing?
Well,
Uh,
that's what it is. It's multi-million dollar corporations with tens of millions, hundreds of millions, sometimes up to $500 million in assets, if you count the people's homes and the common areas, being run by Gus, who didn't like the flowers. He wanted mauve. He got violet. He's mad and he's running for that board. And no one is running because no one seems to understand the importance of it and how bad things can actually go, which is why we're here today.
yeah,
And you've got this weird mix. And so of course you have management companies like mine and like many of the others out there who act as that professional advisor and actually do the work of managing it. But the board has to listen. And if A, the board has to listen, and B, the management company has to be skilled enough to give proper advice, and as do the lawyers. If anything in that mix kind of goes wrong, it can lead to disaster, absolute disaster. And maybe that's a good segue into the first case that we're going to
perfect.
talk about today.
Yeah,
So we had a couple cases we were going to talk about today, just about not getting along in general. Maybe we can dive into one, and then we can kind of bring it back to why that's happening.
sure. Yeah, so the first one we'll touch on is it's called YRCC 570 and Etery. And this one just came out. This one just came out at the beginning of April, the decision. And it's these cases are interesting because they all have common threads. The various cases you hear us talk about at the conferences and educational events and stuff. Um, they have commented, but they all have their own little flavor. In this one, Mrs. Etery is an older individual. There seems to be no dispute that she's suffering from Alzheimer's, and she's under the power of attorney of two of her three daughters, and everything is going generally okay. She's never caused an issue in the community, um, and that's that. She has a third daughter who is living in Israel. And here's where, again, microcosm of society. October 7th hits, she leaves, comes back to live with mom. Microcosm of society, all kinds of older children moving back with their parents, either for financial or for baby boom care reasons. This is what we're seeing. In this case, the daughter, Renee, seems not to be able to function in the condominium community. There are
Such a
serious,
nice way to put it.
well, I put it that way because I'm a gentleman, Eric, but also because that is how the judges in these cases end up almost always using a version of that phrase when they boot someone. They say they are incapable of functioning or living within the condominium community.
So what does that mean if we're not being gentlemen? What was she doing?
So she was um, harassing and stalking the manager. And again, this is just from the reported decision. I wasn't there, but this is the judge's findings. She was harassing and stalking the manager. She was impersonating mom in written correspondence.
Ooh.
Um, and during the proceedings themselves, at some point, it came out. She's like, "Oh, you know what? Mom has signed a new power of attorney. I'm the new sheriff. My two sisters no longer part of it." And the judge saw pretty much right through this, and in very judgely and sort of creative, flexible terms said, "You know what? I don't even care who the power of attorney is. The two sisters are still going to be the litigation guardians for mom, because I find that she is not in a condition to have signed anything fresh over to you." And there were also concerns with general elder abuse. There was somehow video that came out of the suite appearing to show Renee yelling at mom, et cetera, et cetera. And again, talk about themes. So we've got aging in condos, we've got mental health considerations.
Which is becoming a huge one these days.
Yep, we've got domestic violence, not necessarily of a spouse type, but of a child and parent type. And what is the court to do with this? Sometimes the condo can feel absolutely helpless as to what to do about this sort of thing. Ultimately, the judge removes Renee from the building, says she can't live there, says she can't come to visit without the corporation's consent, um, orders the sheriff to enforce if necessary. I'm trying to remember what else there was. I've just got the
Well,
case.
at least the
Um,
courts in this case sided with you
yeah,
know, were reasonable, even though they
yeah,
put it in such nice language. But it's one thing to read it in a case or to talk about it. It's another to experience it. For that manager who was being stalked by this lady, like that has to be a horrific experience, especially in light of the Vaughn shootings back in 2022 and
yep,
everything else that's been going on. To have to go through that, this is someone just doing their job. And as you guys know, there's no HR department in a condo, right? You're kind of on your own. Your board of directors can help. They can seek legal advice, but you're in that building. You're working there, and if there's a threat, that's incredibly stressful.
and
Um,
that's how you have to keep it in mind, especially I mean, it's easier to keep in mind, unfortunately, I think for management and for boards and for residents. I'll tell you, as a lawyer trying to help communities, it's really important to stay grounded in that reality. I had an incident. Maybe this I shouldn't tell you this. I had an incident at the gym the other day. I was getting changed after a swim, and this dude who I've seen before had his phone out in the change room. And he's purportedly watching the hockey game, but he's got two phones actually, and they're pointed conspicuously up. And I'd seen him do this before, and I was like, is today the day I finally confront this kid? So I did, and we had a little bit of a set to, not physical, but things got heated. Eventually he left. He's like, I'll wait for you outside. You're going to consent to the fight on camera. And I was like, all right, dude.
am
And
I okay?
when I left, he was out there, and I'm a big guy, so I'm not typically too scared, but you never know these days. You got a gun or a knife or
Yeah,
whatever.
you just don't know, and no, it
But
can be very scary when
yeah,
somebody has a knife or one lucky punch or something, and it things can go sour very
yeah.
quick.
But I
Yeah,
left, and he was out there, and I was like, "Ugh, whatever." And I went home though, Eric. I went home to my home, and he wasn't at my home. Imagine
yeah.
he's at my home or my workplace.
That's life in a condo, and we I live in a condo as well. That's where I live with my family, my two kids, and we've had people in my building that are call them maladapted human beings. I don't know what you want to call them, but I've had people knock on my door, angry people knock on my door, nothing condo related, just you know, for whatever reason. And it can be very scary. And I got a funny case actually, just to pile on to Etery there. It didn't go to court, but it might one day. One of my buildings, a gentleman who's again just has his own issues, and again with everything going on in the world, we've seen those amp up over the last little while. And it was really actually it amped up in the pandemic, and that's where this story comes from. But now it's kind of back because of the trade war and everything going on in the news. And during the pandemic, he wouldn't ride the elevator with anyone else. He refused to. And the building doesn't have that many elevators, and it's tall. And so people wanted to get in the elevator. At one point, a lady who was very pregnant wanted to get into the elevator to get to an appointment, and he barred her from going in. And being a pregnant lady, she was having none of this, and sort of tried to push her way in. And he physically, I wouldn't say
Oh,
assaulted her, but stopped her. And so we're kind of getting the calls from both sides, down at my site manager at the office there. And the next thing you know, we're checking cameras, and it's like a cartoon. There's him running away from the girl's husband through the stairwells, different floors in the
Benny
parking
Hill.
garage. And like,
Yeah.
thankfully the guy never caught him, because that would have been an assault. But what the hell? Like, you got to live in a community, and like you said, when you're living in a condo, you have no choice. You have to live with people.
Yeah. And you want to take the micro and microcosm. There are dynamics that I'll tell you, I show up to AGMs and I wouldn't visually be aware of. And that's perhaps because of privilege, because of blind spots, whatever term you want to throw
Yep.
at it. There are communities where, to my, unsophisticated eyes, everyone may appear to be of the same, ethnic or racial or community background. Within the community, though, you learn the driving force for this nightmare requisition after requisition is like micro regional differences in the home country. Or
Yeah.
another thing I'm seeing in certain regions, and I see it sort of in the same regions, is those regions where they've got older condos, built in the 70s, 80s, whatever. Those were, very traditional, we'll call it Canadian Anglo ownership. And now we have new young families coming from abroad, moving into those communities. The original owners are of a retirement age, and these people are just clashing for board
Yeah.
control, clashing
Yep.
for use of the community. And no one's right or wrong. That's, we're all together trying to figure this out.
In Canada's and Ontario specifically is very unique, because it is so multicultural. So you kind of get to see in every building how, it's like if you were to design a TV show and you were saying, okay, we're gonna take people from all different parts of the world, all different, demographics, income, age, whatever, and let's put them all in one space and see what they do. This is what they do. They
Survivor
fight.
condo. Yeah.
And oftentimes it has nothing to do with the demographics. It could be an age thing, it could be a national thing, and those definitely happen. But a lot of the times it has nothing to do with that. It's just someone's clinging on to power for longer than they should on the volunteer condo board,
Yep.
because that's important to them. And they won't go, and it's harming the community. And so you start to see people galvanize into different groups. So we support this person because they're, Italian or whatever. We don't because they're not Italian. I don't know whatever the case is, but it all just comes from people, again, being maladapted to live in a society. And that's amped up when you're in a condo, because it's so condensed. But maybe we can talk a little about that. Like, why do people get into condo governance, and why do they not want to leave so often?
Yeah. So the best, in my experience, the best run condo boards are the ones where people have something else to do with their lives.
Absolutely. You got
They usually
jobs, you have careers, you have
families.
families, and this is the thing you're doing on the side to help your investment and make sure no one
Exactly.
else screws it up. Absolutely.
They take it seriously a few times a month, as is appropriate. They
Yep.
review management suggestions, and we all move along. It is those where it is a day-to-day obsession for any number of reasons. It could be boredom. You had a high-powered job, you're retired, and now you need something to fill the day. It could be just naked power. You've never had a taste of this before, and it is seductive and drug-like.
I think that's a big one. You get people who, their whole career, maybe they're coming to the end of their career, and for their whole career they've been working for someone else, and all of a sudden you give them a multi-million-dollar corporation and you say, go. You're now the president, because no one else wanted to do it because
Yeah.
everyone else is busy.
One
And
of the
yeah, it goes to their heads.
one of the places I see this is rule sets. Time to make some new rules. Our rules are old. We had 7 pages of rules, and Patrick, we've prepared a new draft. It's 65 pages of rules
Oh,
to
geez.
control, the color of the robe you can wear to the pool, the style of flip flop, and I'll be honest. You get these files in the door, and you go to the AGM, and I am sitting there often wondering, Like, why do you care? How do you care?
Why do you care? I've got one. He's not one of mine, but it's a shared facility, and he'll stand in the parking lot all summer and most of the winter just watching, just watching. He calls his residents, he's the president, he calls his residents my flock. Like it's some religious
Messiah
thing.
complex, anyone?
Yeah,
Wow.
but it's intense, and like he will never not be the president of that board because anyone who challenges him, that's everything to him. That's it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing else. So if he loses that, that's all he has. Whereas most people in the building are like, well, I could do this, but I have a life, and if I go and I challenge so and so, I have to move because this guy's going to make my life miserable if I actually go to the trouble of unseating him. It just leads to really, really dangerous situations in condos.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good segue into our second case that you're going to talk about. Not exactly a condo board, but again, just a great case of somebody who's not able to live well in a condo, and the chaos that causes for everyone around, including the board, the management, and everyone else.
Yeah, so that one is Essex 38, Essex Condo 38, and Anastasia Tamakis. And, Eric, you and I were joking, and I think we joked at one of the conferences, not related to Maria Damakis. Maria, we're sorry.
Maybe related, maybe not. We don't know. We don't
Maybe
know.
spiritually related, but
Sorry,
not
Maria.
not by blood. So this one is wild. So Tamakis has lived in this condo since 2006, and it's a high rise, and without incident until 2022. What's that? 16 years without incident. And then, the issues that you and I always see, Eric, start to accumulate. There is a big hoarding issue, and there are smells, really bad smells that are so, pungent and migrating that they're going into the party room and making it basically unusable. And that is one of its own issues, and there are ways to address that. It often does.
Very difficult for management to deal with that. Very
Yes.
difficult. Hoarding is one of the toughest things to deal with in a condo, and
Yeah.
it's a real problem. But go on, go on.
No, no,
Sorry.
no. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, because it's not like, oh darn, I didn't get around to cleaning my unit. Condo, yeah, 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 clean it and I'll be good, if you will. It's deeper than that, right? And there's
Yeah,
mental.
and it's a problem that continues. If you are somehow able to get the right people in the right social work mix, and you can clean it, a month later you're back to square one. And normally those people will fight back. They're not happy to see all their things go.
Yeah. So that is tough enough as it is, right? That's a tough one to deal with. But then on top of it, Ms. Tamakis's conduct just takes a severe turn for the worse. Um, urinating in the lobby. One of the ones that gave me a chuckle, even though I appreciate that if I was there, none of this is really funny, but one of the ones that gave me a chuckle is she blocked, I think it was a worker from the elevator or with her walker. And I was like, this is fit for television.
Yeah.
She's calling people C words. She's calling people N words. She, around Halloween, another one of my favorites is she tells, I think it's the manager, hi, it's Halloween. It would be terrible if someone confused you for a witch or a vampire and stabbed you. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but it's
Oh,
just like
yeah. No, that's really scary for the manager, but that's, on a podcast, that's hilarious.
there was
But
a level of creativity to this
yeah,
madness.
yeah, she
Um,
thought about that. She had that lined up.
right, exactly. And she had been put under a temporary or an interim order by a judge already to bind her conduct. And of course, as is often the case, it didn't stick, and there were more incidents. So the corporation found its way back to court. And again, this takes us to the place where the court finds that this individual is not fit to live or capable of living in a condominium community. And they ordered her, and this is sort of the what do you want to call it, the nuclear option, where not only do they tell her that she must vacate her unit, but that she must list it for sale within 90 days and sell it within 150
with
days
with a hoarding problem.
with a hoarding problem.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
They also make her pay the corporation's full costs, full indemnity costs. It's altogether sad. Yes, there's a measure of justice, the owners of the condo and the staff of the condo no longer have to, live with this. But it's overall sad. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that you are literally making someone have to figure out where to go live. And again, the community does have to take precedent, the well-being, but who knows where this person ends up after the decision.
And that's the sad thing about mental health is that, as you mentioned, this person lived no incident for 16 years in a building. So obviously something, dementia or whatever it was kicked in, and that's the worst time to be issuing orders. The people who are creating these problems very rarely listen to the orders unless it really forces you to do something. It's kind of like telling, I have a 4-year-old. It's like telling my 4-year-old to read a parenting book. Like that doesn't work. You can't tell someone who's incapable of getting along and who's behaving like that to start behaving. It just doesn't work. And that's one of the things managers are faced with is, you've got so and so person, they're hoarding, they're yelling at their neighbors. Okay, managers go and fix that. Well, how? We're not trained for that.
Yeah.
Boards aren't trained for that. Lawyers aren't trained for that. It's something that doesn't exist in our world that is desperately, desperately needed. But it's just not there. And so, as you said, though, it is very sad that this person is now, I wouldn't say on the street. She sold the place, but she's left to find a place to live in the state that she's in. But as you said, the community takes priority. You've got to be able to live in your home, and multiple people are being affected. So it's a terrible situation, absolutely terrible situation.
And the elder care angle is, we saw it, it's come up in both of these cases. The sad reality is, it's often people whose families, they don't have families, or they're estranged in some way or abandoned, to even take it back to the very, sad Vaughn shooting. You learn after the fact that that individual's daughters, he was estranged from his daughters for various other reasons. And then, the puzzle falls into place, altogether too late.
Yeah.
You see that in these cases as well, that Etery case, who's taking care of it. The daughters seem to have been, raises a little practice point that we're seeing a lot more of based on harassment, mental illness, and aging, which is what kind of documents can you accept? We got a totally sketchy trustee or trust agreement the other day in the door, and thankfully the manager had the presence of mind to flip it our way and say something about this doesn't smell right. And sure enough,
Right.
it was not valid in any way. But you're busy. I'm talking about manager now. You're busy.
Yeah.
You got 1,000 pieces of paper. You get this thing on the door. It looks like it's called a power of attorney, and so you file it away and you start dealing with that person. But there's pitfalls left and right.
Most managers would never even question it. Most would look at that and say, okay, I was given this document. It looks fine to me. Sure. And you carry on and disaster happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really challenging with people's families because sometimes, they do have children or they have other people that can care for them. But in some cases, in many cases, they don't. And as these people age and mental health sometimes, is a factor, there's no one there for them. And so they're not capable of navigating it. The condo is not capable of handling this. And so the problem just festers. And I've been into units where we knew someone had a hoarding problem. They wouldn't give us access for the longest time. They changed the locks, whatever. And you finally get in there and it's like a murder scene. It's horrific. And you're like, how is someone living like this in our society? You don't understand it until you see it. But if no one is there to help people who need help, it can be terrible. And not just for that person, but like I said, for the whole community, if you have bugs, smells, noise, whatever the case is. So we're almost actually at a half an hour. That went by pretty quick. Do you have any
Yeah.
advice for managers or
Boy.
for board members?
Oh, wow.
You could just be like, no, I have no idea. But
I'm
that would
done.
be a
Yeah,
fair
I don't
answer.
know. I only give that for money. No. Yeah, I do. I do, Eric.
Okay.
There's a few things, and they are not like mechanical little specific tips. They are like framing and thought processes, I think. And these come from, experience, the experiences we've all shared and worked through at different buildings. One is to approach these things with a sort of 360 view. Where a lot of these go wrong is where a community or a board and management come at these with a harsh capital E enforcement angle. These are more nuanced than that. And yes, there are times where, physical safety is at risk that you gotta blast ahead sometimes to court. But many of them don't rise to that level of risk, but are still quite frustrating and annoying. And the way that I urge our communities to tackle those is take a 360 look. Are there mental health resources? Is there family? Is there Are there neighbors? Would meeting with the board or a representative of the board and management help to diffuse the tension a little bit, or better and more sympathetically express the condo's concerns? It can be very easy, and this applies to everyone, to become like a keyboard warrior. And I'll get these email threads in between a manager and an owner, or a president and a tenant, and it's gone way too far already. I wish it would have stopped at email number two. But it's so easy and delicious to like bang out emails to people at 1 in the morning. Whereas it's a lot more difficult to be an asshole sitting across the table in a room
Yeah.
from someone. It just is.
Which is a great full circle to our topic, is that, we live in a world now where technology is taking over, and you don't have as much interaction. You spend a lot of time on screens these days. Kids spend a lot of time on screens, and those kids grow up to be, adults at some point. And that, those social skills that I think we had when we were growing up are different now. And you're absolutely right. It's very easy to send a horrible email to someone. It's very, very different doing that face to face. Unless you're in a gym locker room with Patrick and you were trying to
Correct.
film him,
Yeah.
that's a different story. That guy, that guy was fine with conflict.
Yeah. And it's really easy to hearken to the quote unquote good old days, right? Especially as I become an old man, like we were all communitarian. Society, we were also hugely racist and homophobic and
Yep.
awful in a bunch of different ways. But yes, there was a certain thread or commonality or something. And I think we can leverage some of that technology. Like, okay, maybe we can't meet in person, although that is a wonderful experience. We've got Zoom. Let's invite that person to meet by Zoom. Maybe they even have a social anxiety where they don't want to meet in person, but they will meet by Zoom. And we can use this technology instead of to divide us. We can use it to help solve or diffuse some of these problems. And I get pushback. You probably do too. I get a lot of pushback. I go, board, you're not going to like this advice. I think you should meet with this person. They
Yeah.
clearly hate the person. Person's clearly a jerk, but I say meet with them, because you know what? If nothing else, that judge or CAT member wants to see that you met with them.
Yeah, and to help. I mean, like, craziness is on a spectrum, right? And for the people who are moderately hard to get along with, having a sit down with them could actually avoid, a major escalation. There are those people on the extreme end of the spectrum, and when I say spectrum, I mean just of general craziness, who it doesn't matter what you do, they're going to be a problem. But if you can avoid one person who's, just a bit of a jerk from turning into your biggest nightmare, that's a win. And if you can do that just by sitting down and being civil, at least trying that approach rather than coming down with a sledgehammer, that's a win. And sometimes the problem is the people on your side, on the condo governance side, can be just as bad. Like I said, if we have one of those condo dictators who runs their flock in whatever way they want, um, their flock, they may not be okay with using the kid gloves. They may want to come down with the sledgehammer right off the bat, and that just leads to a ton of conflict. I'm gonna have to cut it. I think we're
Oh
at the end of our
no.
30. I don't know. I didn't actually
Great.
check when we started, but I think we're at the end of our 30
Yeah.
minutes. But with all that said, I think that was a great discussion, and thank you
Yeah.
so much for being our very, very first
It's my honor. Thank
guest on
you.
Penthouse. I mean, on whatever we're gonna call this thing.
Condo after dark.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much. I thought that was great. And again, thank you to Patrick Greco from Shibley Righton. All the best. Take
Awesome.
care.
Thanks, Eric. Have a great one.